Good morning. Well, astrologically, there are a lot of changes that are going to occur in this month of March. And today I want to talk about the first one I consider important, and that is Saturn making a semisextile to Pluto. So let me share my screen and we'll get started. Almost ready. Okay. Now I'm ready to go. Saturn semisextile Pluto, March 3rd. Now, Saturn was geocentrically semisextile Pluto on March 3rd, 2023. That's with the Earth at the center of things. So it's from the perspective of us on Earth. But will heliocentrically make a semisextile to Pluto on March 11th, 2023. To understand why this is important, we need to go back to the most recent conjunction of Saturn and Pluto and conjunctions of other planets that also occurred at 22 degrees Capricorn in order to put current events into historical perspective. So first, on January 12th, 2020, Pluto, the planet of death, was conjunct Saturn, destruction, in Capricorn, and that began a cycle of transformation of structures that will last until 2053. This was essentially the start of the pandemic and other major changes. And it is also the date on which I got COVID for the first time. Lucky me. Furthermore, since this conjunction occurred in the 22nd degree of Capricorn, this may add extra tension to the situation. And this is because 22.5 degrees is 3/4 of the way through a 30-degree cycle, just as 270 degrees is 3/4 of the way through a 360-degree cycle. Hence, this degree position in any sign may be like a waning square. Also, the late great mundane astrologer Andre Barbeau observed that pandemics and conflicts are often triggered by hard aspects between Saturn and Pluto, particularly when they are magnified either by Jupiter, an eclipse, or other adverse conditions. And just 2 days before Pluto and Saturn were in exact conjunction, there was a lunar eclipse, and all of these conditions were present. We had Sun and Mercury at 20 degrees of Capricorn, very close to Saturn and Pluto, already both of them at 20 to 22 plus degrees of Capricorn. Jupiter at 8 degrees Capricorn was conjunct the South Node, also at 8 degrees Capricorn. This is in opposition to the Moon at 20 degrees Cancer because it's an eclipse, a lunar eclipse and a full moon. And Chiron, which often causes wounding, was making a wide square to both sides of this opposition. Furthermore, the Saturn-Pluto conjunction on January 12th, 2020 was conjunct China's natal Jupiter at 22 plus degrees Capricorn. And Jupiter is also the ruler of China's rising sign. Hence, it's no wonder that the pandemic began in China. And here you can see in the slide wheel, we have China's chart on the inside, the transits on January 12th, 2020 on the outside, and Saturn and Jupiter, both at 22 plus degrees Capricorn, strongly conjunct China's Jupiter at 22 degrees Capricorn, with Jupiter being the ruler of its first house, its ascendant. Now, we can also look at Vladimir Putin's chart. But first, let me point out there is some debate or uncertainty about Putin's actual birth date, birth time, and birthplace. However, the data and chart I'm using here is what most astrologers use. And this birth data has also been confirmed by Putin's webmaster. I've been using it for a few years and it seems to work quite well. So let's see what was going on in Putin's chart on January 12th, 2020. Well, Saturn and Pluto at 22 plus degrees Capricorn, they were making a very strong quincunx, that's a 150 degree aspect, to Putin's natal Pluto at 22 degrees Leo. Okay, now this kind of pokes at him. The quincunx always makes you want to or have to make adjustments to something. And Pluto also rules Putin's first house, and it's in his 10th house. So it's poking at his desires for power. And with his Pluto in a very tight conjunction with the South Node, this can represent past tendencies. It's sort of the path of least resistance. And it's conjunct the cusp of his 10th house. It's in Leo. So this suggests that Putin would like to be a czar in the past traditions of Russia, the single individual ruling, controlling everything. And if we look at the North Node tends to show things that we have an intense desire for that we don't really have yet. And it's conjunct the cusp of his 4th house, which rules the home. That's quite interesting because Putin lost his grandmother in a war. Both of his older brothers died before he was born. And so there was a lot of loss in his home. And in this case, since he is the leader of Russia, the home can also refer to the homeland. So this could be a strong desire to restore the homeland, the old Soviet Union, which he could be the czar of. This could also represent, since the North Node is in Aquarius, he perhaps desires the respect of democracies out there, other kinds of governments, and he doesn't have it. Okay, now another thing going on in his chart is this Saturn-Pluto conjunction was making a strong square to Mercury and Neptune in his 12th house, which is among other things, the house of self-undoing. And this could create a lot of fantasies for various things. And all of this likely fueled his desire to possess Ukraine. Now, several things in recent years have happened at 22 degrees of Capricorn. And in particular, on March 20th of 2020, Jupiter and Mars were conjunct in Capricorn at the same degree as the recent Pluto-Saturn conjunction. And this energized and expanded the original Pluto-Saturn impulse. And the COVID pandemic grew and was followed by war in Ukraine in 2022. Then again, on November 12th of 2020, Jupiter and Pluto were conjunct at 22 degrees Capricorn. This brought the pandemic back to the forefront. However, while Saturn contracts, Jupiter expands. And we saw not only a surge in COVID cases, but also the development of effective vaccines. This was the month in which we got the results of clinical trials for vaccines, and they were all working quite well. And about a year ago, on February 24th, 2022, Mars and Venus were both at 22 degrees Capricorn. The conjunction wasn't exact, but you can see over here it was very, very close. And this was when Russia invaded Ukraine. While the pandemic was being brought under control, the impact on Putin of the 22 Saturn-Pluto conjunction was just beginning to unleash its most destructive power. Traditionally, whenever we have Mars conjunct Venus, a lot of astrologers may say that on a personal level, this is great for physical romance, and that is probably true, but in this instance, this conjunction, it's occurring at 22 degrees, which is a rather malevolent uh, degree position in any sign. Remember, it has a little bit of that nature of a waning square. So in this case, think of Venus as representing Putin's values and Mars as aggression. And so he acts aggressively toward Ukraine. And this, along with several other astrological things, are indicators of why this invasion occurred. Also, on February 24th, 2022, if we look at Ukraine's chart, that's in the center here, Saturn was making a very strong square to natal Pluto in this chart. And this created a resonance with the 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction. So you can see it right here. Saturn at 18 degrees Aquarius, conjunct the moon, Ukraine's moon at 22 degrees Aquarius. Again, that's kind of a malevolent position. But Saturn is making a very strong square to Pluto in Ukraine's chart. So this square, it created that resonance with the 2020 Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And then there are some other very concerning indications with the transits on this day. Transiting Chiron at 10 degrees Aries, it's making an extremely strong square to natal Uranus at 10 degrees Capricorn, conjunct Ukraine's ascendant. And then we have both the lunar nodes, the transiting lunar nodes making strong squares to Jupiter, Mercury, and Venus, all in Leo here. So what's happening now? Well, with Saturn having made a semisextile to Pluto, we're entering the next phase of the synodic cycle. The January 12th, 2020 Pluto-Saturn conjunction initiated a period in which a pandemic caused many of the world's structures to break down. And this was followed by a dictator's invasion of Ukraine. But in March, we enter a new phase of the cycle in which Saturn and Pluto will begin to work more independently of one another. Saturn will now start a second house relationship with Pluto and will try and stabilize and maintain whatever transformations, good or bad, that Pluto began. Now, currently, the COVID pandemic has been brought under control in most countries, and we're entering an endemic phase that will be characterized by predictable patterns and effective countermeasures. And in the war in Ukraine, we also seem to be entering a new phase in which each side is literally entrenched warfare in order to preserve whatever gains they've made. Okay. Let me stop my screen sharing now. And so there you have it. What is happening right now is we've had a lot of drama with Saturn and Pluto for the past 3 years. But now those planets are separating. The relationship is going from a first house relationship to a second house relationship. And Saturn is trying to stabilize things a bit. The stabilization is coming along quite well with the pandemic. With the war in Ukraine, it's more of a stalemate. The stabilization expresses itself right now as a stalemate. Nonetheless, it looks like many countries around the world, they want to get beyond this war. They want to bring the conflict to an end. China recently put out a 12-point peace plan that they proposed. Maybe something will come of that, maybe it won't. But the point is, people are trying to bring this conflict to an end. And hopefully that will come about. And nonetheless, regardless of whether the current initiatives work or not, we are entering a new phase to things, and that brings about some hope. So, in the meantime, let's just all pray, meditate, and visualize world peace. That's it for today. So let me stop this recording and say so long.